For over a century, one face has stood in for all of ancient Egypt. Long neck, high cheekbones, a crown that rises like a tower, one dark eye that seems to follow you across the room. It sits behind bulletproof glass in a museum in Berlin, and every year more than 500,000 people cross an ocean just to stand in front of it. Art historians call it the most beautiful face that survives from the ancient world. For 100 years, nobody thought to ask what was underneath the paint. Then, in 2006, a team of researchers wheeled the bust into a hospital-grade CT scanner. And the machine found something that no living person had seen in 3,000 years. This is the true story of that discovery, and of the woman the mask was built to replace. Nefertiti was not a decoration. She was the great royal wife of Akhenaten, the pharaoh who tried to remake Egyptian religion from the ground up, and the surviving art from her reign shows her doing things no queen before her had ever been shown doing. Temple reliefs at Amarna depict her wearing the blue war crown usually reserved for kings, standing at the same height and scale as her husband, a break from thousands of years of convention, where queens were carved smaller than their pharaohs. In some scenes she appears alone, performing rituals to the sun god that only a pharaoh or high priest would normally perform. Some scholars argue the evidence goes further still, and that after Akhenaten's death Nefertiti ruled Egypt in her own right, under a new name. We'll come back to that theory, because it's one of the real unresolved mysteries in the story, not the invented ones. What isn't in dispute is that she was central to power in one of the strangest periods in Egyptian history. Her husband shut down the old temples, sidelined the priesthood that had run Egyptian religious life for 1,000 years, and declared that only he and Nefertiti could commune with the one god he now demanded Egypt worship, the sun disk Aten. It was a revolution. And revolutions leave enemies. Somewhere in the final years of that revolution, in the royal city of Amarna, a master sculptor named Thutmose ran a busy workshop producing portraits of the royal family. In 1912, a German archaeological team led by Ludwig Borchardt was excavating the ruins of that workshop when they uncovered a limestone and stucco bust lying in the debris, remarkably intact. It hadn't been placed in a tomb or a temple. It had simply been left behind, likely a working model kept in the studio for other artists to copy. Plaster casts of the bust's ears were found in the same room, evidence that pieces of it were used as reference for other sculptures. The bust was shipped to Berlin, and in 1924 it went on public display for the first time. The reaction was immediate. Newspapers and scholars alike declared it one of the great masterpieces of the ancient world. Egypt, for its part, objected almost from the start, arguing the piece should never have left the country, a dispute that is still very much alive today and one we'll return to. For 80 years, the working assumption among Egyptologists was straightforward: a solid limestone core, shaped roughly, with a thin layer of painted stucco built up on top to create the fine detail, the standard technique for Amarna period sculpture. Nobody had strong reason to think this bust was different. In 2006, a research team led by radiologist Alexander Huppertz used computed tomography to look inside the bust in far more detail than earlier X-rays had allowed. What the scan revealed surprised even the people who ran it. The limestone core wasn't just a rough armature. It was itself a fully carved, highly detailed face, and it didn't match the face on the surface. The inner face had a slight bump on the bridge of the nose, where the outer layer was carved perfectly smooth and straight. Its cheeks were less full. There were subtle creases at the corners of the mouth and softer definition around the eyes, the kind of detail an artist adds when they're working from close observation of a real, living face, wrinkles and asymmetries included, rather than idealizing it. Researchers estimated the stucco layers on the surface ranged from about 1 millimeter thick in some places to nearly 2 centimeters in others, thick enough, especially around the cheeks and nose, to meaningfully reshape what people would see. In other words, Thutmose appears to have carved a genuine, observed likeness first, and then used the plaster layer to soften, smooth, and idealize it, the ancient equivalent of retouching. This isn't as sinister as it might sound. Idealizing royal portraiture was standard practice across Egyptian art for centuries, a way of showing not what a ruler looked like on any given afternoon but their eternal, perfected self. But it does mean the face the world fell in love with is, quite literally, a flattering revision, and the truer likeness spent 3,000 years sealed inside it, unseen. There's a second detail people notice the moment they see the bust in person. The right eye has a striking, lifelike inlay of quartz and beeswax, with a dark pupil painted on, anatomically careful enough that its structure has been studied by ophthalmologists. The left eye socket is empty. For decades, this fueled speculation: was the eye lost, stolen, damaged in antiquity? The CT scans and later inspections found no trace of adhesive or wear inside the empty socket, suggesting an inlay was ever fitted and later fell out. The leading explanation among Egyptologists today is simpler and in some ways more interesting. The bust was very likely unfinished. As a workshop model rather than a finished, dedicatory object, there may have been no need to complete the second eye. It's worth knowing, too, that ancient Egyptians did attach real spiritual significance to completing a statue's eyes. In certain contexts, finishing and opening a statue's eyes was part of rituals believed to let a divine or royal presence inhabit an image. Whether that belief has anything to do with this particular unfinished eye is something historians still debate. There's no inscription or record that tells us for certain why it was left this way. What we do know is that Nefertiti's story does not end cleanly. Around year 12 of Akhenaten's roughly 17-year reign, she stops appearing in the official record under her own name and titles. There's no surviving death notice, no funeral text, no identified tomb built for her at Amarna. What follows in the inscriptions is genuinely murky, and Egyptologists disagree about how to read it. One name that surfaces in this period is Nefertiti, a ruler whose titles carry feminine grammatical markers, a real and closely studied detail in the hieroglyphic record. Some scholars, including James Allen, have argued this figure was Nefertiti herself, continuing to rule under a modified name after Akhenaten's death, possibly as a co-regent or a full pharaoh in her own right. Others argue Nefertiti was a different woman entirely, possibly Meriteten, Nefertiti's eldest daughter. This is a live, unresolved academic debate, not a settled fact, and it's one of the genuinely fascinating open questions in Egyptology. What's much better documented is what happened after Akhenaten's religious revolution collapsed. His young successor, Tutankhamun, his son by a different wife, restored the old gods, reopened the temples, and returned power to the priesthoods his father had sidelined. In the years that followed, a systematic effort was made to erase the Amarna period from official memory. Akhenaten's monuments were dismantled and reused as building material, entire temple walls broken into small blocks called talatat and stuffed inside later pylons and foundations, where archaeologists are still finding them today. Cartouches bearing Akhenaten's and Nefertiti's names were chiseled off inscriptions across Egypt. It wasn't personal spite so much as religious cleanup. The Amarna gods were being formally unmade, and every name associated with them was a liability. In 1817, explorers entered a small, undecorated tomb in the Valley of the Kings known as KV-21. It's a plain cutting in the rock, no painted walls, no inscriptions, none of the burial goods that would normally identify an occupant. Inside were two unwrapped female mummies, both unidentified. In 2010, a genetic study led by Zahi Hawass examined royal mummies from this period, including the KV-21 remains, and found that one of them shared close familial DNA markers consistent with being closely related to Tutankhamun, potentially his mother. Some researchers, including Hawass, have floated Nefertiti as one possible candidate for this identity. But it's important to be accurate here. This identification has not been confirmed. Other candidates have been proposed for the same mummy, most notably Akhenaten's other major wife, Kia, and the DNA evidence, degraded after 3,000 years, has been challenged by other geneticists on methodological grounds. As of today, the identity of the KV-21 mummies remains genuinely unresolved, and any claim of forensic proof of violence done to Nefertiti specifically should be treated with real skepticism. No peer-reviewed study has established that. The most talked about theory in recent Nefertiti research doesn't involve a mummy at all, it involves a wall. In 2015, British Egyptologist Nicholas Reeves published an analysis of high-resolution laser scans of Tutankhamun's burial chamber and proposed something striking. Faint lines beneath the painted plaster on the north and west walls appeared, in his reading, to trace the outlines of sealed doorways. His theory was that Tutankhamun's tomb, unusually small and oddly laid out for a pharaoh, was originally built as an extension of a larger, earlier tomb, quite possibly Nefertiti's, and that when the young king died unexpectedly, he was hastily buried in what had been the tomb's outer corridor, with her original burial chamber sealed and plastered over behind him. This is a real, seriously argued academic hypothesis, and it made international headlines. It also has not held up well under testing. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted in 2016 by a Japanese team, led by Hirokatsu Watanabe, reported anomalies consistent with a possible void. But a more rigorous follow-up survey in 2018, using different equipment and methodology and coordinated with National Geographic, found no evidence of hidden chambers behind either wall. Reeves has continued to argue the case isn't closed and has proposed further investigation, but Egypt's Ministry of Antiquities has, for now, treated the question as settled in the negative. It remains possible new scanning technology could revisit the question, but at present there is no confirmed hidden tomb. There's one more real, unresolved conflict in this story, and it's not archaeological, it's diplomatic. Egypt has formally requested the return of the Nefertiti bust from Germany multiple times over the past century, arguing that its removal in 1912 involved, at minimum, a misrepresentation of the object's significance to Egyptian officials at the time, who approved its export believing it to be a lesser find. Germany maintains the acquisition was legal under the antiquities partition system in place at the time, and has consistently declined to return it, while occasionally loaning casts or replicas for exhibition elsewhere. It's one of the longest-running restitution disputes in the museum world, sitting alongside cases like the Parthenon marbles and the Benin bronzes, and it shows no sign of resolving soon. Strip away the exaggeration, and the true story of this bust is still remarkable. A sculptor, working more than 3,000 years ago, carved a real woman's face with enough observational honesty that a modern CT scanner could still find her wrinkles, her asymmetry, the particular shape of her nose, and then covered nearly. All of it in a layer of idealized plaster that the world would fall in love with instead. Somewhere behind that painted surface is a queen whose real political power historians are still arguing about, whose final years and possible reign are genuinely uncertain, and whose body has never been definitively identified. The bust in Berlin isn't hiding a monster or a murder. It's hiding something quieter and, in its own way, just as striking. The difference between how a powerful woman actually looked and how the people around her decided she should be remembered. 3,000 years later, we're still arguing about which version of her we're allowed to see.